The click of the lock was louder than it should have been. A mahogany boardroom door swung shut, the polished brass handle gleaming in the fluorescent light of the corridor. The echo rang through the hushed hallway like a gavel striking down. Inside, muffled laughter spilled through the wood, a rising chorus of clinking glasses, confident voices, the low hum of corporate triumph. And outside stood Marcus Ellison. His shoes were planted firmly on the gleaming marble floor, polished so smooth he could see the reflection of his face staring back up at him, jaw tight, expression unreadable. In his hand, he held a leather portfolio embossed with the company crest. His other hand gripped a crisp white card, the embossed invitation to the most important board meeting of the year. The letters shimmered under the hallway's sterile lighting. Strategic Partnership and Merger Signing Ceremony. Board members only. Marcus was a board member. More than that, he was the CEO of Ellison Dynamics, the fastest-growing subsidiary the company had. And yet, he was on the wrong side of that door. "Sir," said the security guard, a young man in an ill-fitting suit stationed in front of the boardroom like a soldier. He held up one hand, as if Marcus were a stranger trying to sneak into a private party. "This meeting is restricted access. Directors only." Marcus's gaze didn't flicker. His voice was calm, steady, each word deliberate. "I am a director, Marcus Ellison. You'll find my name printed on the seating chart inside." The guard hesitated. For a second, uncertainty cracked his professional mask. But then a shadow fell across the hallway. A man emerged from the boardroom, tall, silver-haired, his suit tailored perfection, his cufflinks catching the light with arrogant brilliance. This was Charles Wentworth, senior vice chairman and one of the company's longest-standing power brokers. His reputation was built on ruthless efficiency and an unshakable belief in his own superiority. "Ah," Wentworth said smoothly, eyes flicking up and down Marcus as though scanning a minor inconvenience. His lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Ellison, I believe there's been some confusion." He turned to the guard without lowering his voice. "You're doing the right thing. This particular meeting requires, shall we say, a certain level of senior input, strategic thinkers, not operational figures." It was said like a compliment, but the venom was unmistakable. He wasn't addressing Marcus. He was dismissing him, publicly, in front of a hallway of assistants, interns, and staff who suddenly found reasons to linger nearby. "I have the official invitation," Marcus replied, holding up the card. His tone wasn't offensive, but steady, unflinching. "My authorization is in writing. As you know, Wentworth Ellison Dynamics is one of the signatories on this merger." Wentworth's eyes glittered with something colder than amusement. Of course," he said with mock patience. "But let's not confuse the letter of an invitation with the spirit of participation. We need efficiency in there, Marcus. Too many voices slow things down." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his posture remained perfectly calm. He could feel the eyes on him. An assistant clutching a tray of bottled water, a secretary with a stack of files, even the janitor who had paused mid-sweep. They were all watching a man with CEO on his title being treated like an intruder in his own company's house. The humiliation was thick, pressing against the skin. "Let me make this simple," Wentworth continued, his voice carrying easily down the corridor. "The real decision-makers are already seated. We don't need the distractions of subsidiary-level concerns." The word landed heavy. Subsidiary. As if Ellison Dynamics, the division that had delivered 3 consecutive record-breaking quarters, was a side hustle, an afterthought, a child's company compared to the empire of men like Wentworth. For the first time, Marcus spoke without holding back. His voice wasn't raised, but its weight silenced the hallway. "Do you know what a door is, Wentworth?" The older man blinked, thrown by the question. "A door," Marcus continued, "is a test. It either keeps you out or it proves you belong inside. Right now, you're mistaking me for someone who knocks." The security guard shifted uneasily, glancing between the two men. Wentworth's smug smile faltered just a fraction before snapping back into place. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only Marcus could hear. "Play this carefully, Ellison. You've done well for yourself. Impressive, really. But don't overestimate your role. You're a piece on the board, not the player moving the pieces. Be satisfied with what you've been given. He straightened, gave a curt nod to guard, and disappeared back into boardroom. The door shut again with a heavy, deliberate click. The silence afterward was deafening. Marcus remained standing for a long moment, his reflection still staring back from the polished marble. He could feel the sting of every pair of eyes watching, the assistants whispering, the guards' nervous shifting. A lesser man might have argued, demanded entry, raised his voice. But Marcus did none of that. Instead, he walked slowly to a leather bench along the wall, sat down, and placed his portfolio on his lap. He opened it with quiet precision, pulled out a pen, and began writing notes. A young assistant, barely in her 20s, clutching a tablet, approached hesitantly. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "Sir, why don't you just walk away? They clearly don't want you in there." Marcus looked up at her, his expression calm, his eyes steady. "Sometimes," he said, "the most powerful thing you could do is let people show you exactly who they are." The assistant swallowed, nodded quickly, and retreated. Inside the boardroom, muffled laughter rose again, followed by the sound of glasses clinking together in a toast. Their celebration carried through the door like an insult, like a victory lap run at his expense. Marcus leaned back on the bench. His face was composed, but beneath the surface, something harder was forming, a diamond edge of resolve. He wasn't excluded. He wasn't powerless. He was waiting. And soon enough, they would discover the cost of underestimating the man they left outside. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The boardroom was a cathedral of wealth. A chandelier dripped light like molten crystal over a table, so large it looked capable of seating royalty. Polished oak, long enough to host 24 chairs, gleamed under recessed spotlights. Every inch of the room carried a message. This was where power lived. And right now, power was laughing. Inside, the executives of Titan Global, men in tailored suits and women in designer blouses, were mid-toast. Crystal glasses clinked, wine sloshed, and the air hummed with smug satisfaction. To the future, boomed Charles Wentworth, raising his glass high. His voice carried the smug resonance of a man who had never once worried about being locked out of anything. To Titan Global, to our shareholders, and to the merger that will cement our dominance for decades to come. Applause erupted around the table. Smiles, nods, the sort of empty enthusiasm that fills a room when people are congratulating themselves for victories not yet won. Across the polished surface, the corporate lawyer, a thin, hawk-faced man with papers neatly stacked before him, smiled indulgently. "We just need a few more signatures. But as far as I can see, gentlemen and ladies, this deal is as good as sealed." The executives leaned back, satisfied. They were about to merge with Sentinix Capital, a financial giant with global reach. The numbers promised exponential growth. Stock prices soaring, bonuses in the millions, personal legacy secured in gold leaf. It was the kind of deal that made careers eternal. And yet, just outside that thick mahogany door, the man whose pen was legally required to finalize it was sitting quietly on a bench, ignored. Wentworth eased back in his chair, loosening his tie slightly. "You know," he said, swirling the Merlot in his glass, "I almost admire Ellison. The man has hustle. Came from nothing, climbed his way up. But we all know his division is a lucky break. Flash in the pan tech trends. Useful for the optics of diversity, of course, but hardly the backbone of this company." A ripple of laughter spread around the table. One of the executives, a sharp-featured woman with a string of pearls around her neck, leaned forward conspiratorially. "Honestly, I think Marcus confuses himself for a real player. Just because his little innovation wing had a good year, he thinks he belongs at this table." More laughter. Someone muttered, a seat warmer in the CEO's suit, and the chuckles grew louder. At the far end of the table, the chief financial officer, a heavy-set man with a booming voice, added, "Let him run his sideshow. We can't afford distractions. When history is written about Titan Global's triumph, no one will be asking what Marcus Ellison thought about it." They laughed again, glasses raised. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Marcus sat perfectly still. The sounds of the mockery seeped faintly through the walls, not in words, but in tone, the cadence of laughter that always seemed to sharpen when it was at someone's expense. He knew he didn't need to hear the details. He'd lived this rhythm all his life. He looked down at his portfolio, its pages filled with the financial breakdowns, projections, and technical reports he'd spent weeks refining. He had been prepared to present them inside that room, to walk them through the numbers line by line. But they had decided those numbers were irrelevant because the man presenting them didn't fit their image of what power looked like. He breathed slowly, deliberately, each inhale a reminder that his composure was not weakness, but armor. Across the hallway, the same young assistant from earlier hovered nervously, tablet clutched to her chest. She had heard enough from inside to understand the cruelty of it. She whispered, "Sir, you should be in there. Why don't you just force your way?" Marcus looked at her, eyes calm. "You don't demand to sit at a table. When you own the building it's in." She blinked, startled, then nodded quickly and retreated. Back inside, the meeting grew louder, bolder. Wentworth tapped his pen on the stack of documents. "Now, the last formality is securing the co-signature from Ellison Dynamics. But between us," he smirked, "that's a rubber stamp. Marcus knows better than to stand in the way of history." The pearl necklace executive giggled, assuming he could even read the fine print. This time, the laughter was restrained. It was open, ugly, rolling across the table like a wave of entitlement. They laughed not because it was funny, but because it reinforced what they wanted to believe, that Marcus was small, irrelevant, a placeholder rather than a partner. Only one man didn't laugh, the corporate lawyer. His smile remained tight, but his eyes flickered briefly to the unsigned portion of the contract. He knew better than most that ink on paper mattered more than champagne in glasses. Still, he said nothing for now. In the hallway, Marcus's pen moved across a page, but he wasn't taking meeting notes anymore. He was drafting something far sharper, a list. Names, behaviors, moments. The security guard who had blocked him, the executives who had sneered, the chairman who had orchestrated his exclusion. Each name, each insult, a stroke of the blade, he was quietly sharpening. The laughter from inside grew again, followed by applause. Someone had likely made another joke at his expense. Marcus paused mid-stroke of his pen. He let the sound wash over him, felt the sting, and then released it. Anger was a fire, but he had long ago learned how to bank flames into steel. He wasn't here to argue with small men over his place. He was here to let them build their own gallows with words and arrogance. And they were doing it perfectly. The chairman finally stood at the head of the table. His voice carried authority, commanding silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, enough chatter. It's time to sign." The lawyer slid the final page forward. The chairman poised his pen above the paper. A dozen cameras, set up to record the historic moment, words softly in the background, and then the lawyer cleared his throat. "Forgive me, but before we proceed, there is a procedural matter." The room stilled. The chairman frowned. "What matter?" The lawyer tapped the empty signature line at the bottom of the page. "This merger agreement requires dual authorization. Specifically, the co-signature of Mr. Marcus Ellison as CEO of Ellison Dynamics. Without it, the contract cannot be executed." The silence was instant, total. Glasses lowered. Smiles faltered. For the first time in hours, not a single laugh echoed across the boardroom. Wentworth's face hardened. "Ellison's not required for this stage," he snapped. "His input is." "Legally essential," the lawyer interrupted smoothly, his voice like a scalpel. "Section 7, paragraph 3 of the partnership charter. Mr. Ellison's authorization is binding. Without his pen, this deal does not exist." Every eye in the room darted toward Wentworth. The confidence cracked. And just outside the door, Marcus Ellison calmly underlined another name on his list. The boardroom was a vacuum. The moment the lawyer's words landed, the atmosphere shifted with the force of a thunderclap. The executives who had been laughing seconds before now sat rigid, eyes darting, expressions souring into disbelief. Crystal glasses trembled slightly against polish as though they too, understood that something fragile had just cracked. At the head of the table, Chairman Victor Caldwell, an iron-haired patriarch whose voice once carried enough weight to silence Wall Street, slowly lowered his pen. The nib hovered a centimeter above the line meant to bind a billion-dollar merger. His jaw tightened. "Explain," Caldwell said quietly. His voice carried none of the jovial warmth from earlier. It was sharp steel now. The lawyer adjusted his tie. According to Titan Global's partnership charter, any merger involving subsidiary companies above a 30% stake requires dual authorization. In this case, he tapped the document with a manicured finger. Mr. Marcus Ellison's signature is mandatory. Without it, the contract is incomplete, invalid. A ripple of unease swept through the room. The pearl necklace executive who had mocked Marcus earlier blanched. The CFO let out a nervous cough, as if clearing his throat might erase the clause. Wentworth was the first to recover. His laugh was too loud, too sharp, betraying nerves. "Nonsense. Ellison knows where his bread is buttered. He wouldn't dare hold up something of this magnitude. He'll sign." The lawyer's gaze was steady, unblinking. "Then, Mr. Wentworth, I suggest you invite him in." The words hung heavy in the air. Silence pressed against the mahogany walls, suffocating. The very air seemed thicker, harder to draw in. Caldwell leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "Where is he?" The security guard at the door stammered. "Sir, he's just outside, in the hallway." For a moment, no one moved. The revelation was too bitter, too humiliating. The man they had dismissed as irrelevant had been within earshot all along. Finally, Wentworth snapped his fingers at an assistant. "Fetch him." His voice cracked like a whip, trying to reassert dominance. But dominance no longer belonged to him. The assistant rushed out, yanking the heavy door open. And there, as if he had been waiting for centuries rather than minutes, sat Marcus Ellison. He hadn't moved from the bench. His portfolio still rested in his lap, a pen balanced between his fingers. The young assistant from earlier stood nearby, her expression taut with nervous anticipation. Marcus looked up at the board's errand runner, his eyes calm, unreadable. "Mr. Ellison," the assistant stammered, "the board requests your presence immediately." Marcus didn't rise right away. He studied the assistant's anxious face, then glanced at the closed door. The laughter inside had stopped. He could sense the silence pressing against the wood. It was almost amusing. "Now they want me in the room," he murmured, his tone even, almost reflective. The assistant swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Only then did Marcus rise. He slid the portfolio under his arm, adjusted his cuffs with slow precision, and walked toward the door. Each step echoed against the marble floor like the ticking of a countdown clock. The security guard who had barred his way earlier stiffened, eyes wide with sudden realization, but said nothing. The door opened. All heads turned. Marcus stepped into the boardroom with a calm that was louder than any entrance music. The room that had moments ago dismissed him as irrelevant now sat frozen, caught between embarrassment and desperation. He stopped just inside, his eyes sweeping across the table. Wentworth's smirk had vanished. The pearl necklace executive fiddled with her glass, her hands trembling. Caldwell, ever the patriarch, tried to maintain composure, but the tightening around his mouth betrayed him. "Mr. Ellison," Caldwell said with forced gravitas, "we were just about to begin finalizing the merger. It seems we require your input." Marcus tilted his head slightly. His voice was quiet, but its weight landed on every ear in the room. Input or permission? A flicker of discomfort ran through the executives. Wentworth interjected quickly. "Let's not exaggerate. It's a simple formality. All we need is your signature here." He gestured at the empty line, his tone overly jovial, desperate to frame this as routine. Marcus's gaze locked on him. "A formality," he repeated softly. Then, after a beat, "Tell me, Wentworth, when you locked that door, what did you think I was?" "A formality, too." The room tensed. No one spoke. Marcus walked slowly toward the table. He placed his portfolio down, opened it, and carefully removed a pen. He didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table opposite Caldwell, his posture commanding without effort. He looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes. It's interesting, he said, voice steady, almost conversational. You invite a man into your company. You plaster his division's profits across your quarterly reports. You celebrate his work when it suits your narrative. But when it comes time to make history, you shut him out. You laugh at him. You reduce him to a distraction. The pearl necklace executive looked down at her hands. The CFO coughed again, weaker this time. Marcus leaned slightly over the table. And now, suddenly I'm essential. The weight of the moment was unbearable. Several executives shifted in their chairs, the air conditioning humming louder than their own voices. Wentworth tried again, his voice brittle. Marcus, come now. We may have miscalculated, but let's not derail this. The merger is good for all of us. For you, too. Sign, and we move forward together. Marcus's eyes cut to him like blades. Together? You can't lock a man out, mock his worth, and then ask him to rescue you under the same breath. That isn't together. That's desperation. Wentworth's face reddened. He opened his mouth, but Caldwell cut him off with a raised hand. The chairman's voice was low, commanding. What do you want, Marcus? Marcus took a long breath. He let the silence stretch, every second tightening the noose around the board's arrogance. He picked up the pen, twirled it slowly between his fingers, then set it down again. What I want, he said finally, isn't a seat at your table. I already own the table. You just didn't realize it until now. The words detonated like a bomb. Gasps, shifting chairs, wide eyes. It was the inversion of everything they thought they knew. Marcus wasn't a token, wasn't a formality. He was the keystone. Remove him, and the arch collapsed. And for the first time in years, Caldwell looked rattled. His hand tightened around his glass, knuckles pale. Marcus, he said carefully, if you walk away from this, you understand what it means. You'll destroy the deal. The stock will plummet. Shareholders will revolt. Marcus's gaze didn't waver. Then perhaps they should know who truly destroyed it, the ones who mistook arrogance for strategy and prejudice for leadership. The silence afterward was heavier than any shout. For the first time in that hallowed boardroom, power had shifted. It no longer sat in the hands of the old guard, the laughing voices, the men in perfect suits. It sat squarely with a man they had dismissed, waiting patiently outside a locked door. And now he was inside. For a long breath, no one moved. Marcus stood at the far end of the boardroom, the weight of the table, of the company's history, running between him and the men and women who had mistaken arrogance for strategy. The chandelier hummed faintly. Outside, city traffic threaded through afternoon light. Inside, silence waited to be told what it was worth. Before we continue, Marcus said, as if they were discussing seating arrangements, we'll need an accurate record of the last hour. He reached into his portfolio, placed a slim black device on the oak, and tapped it once. A soft tone. The red light glowed. For the minutes, he added, looking directly at the corporate lawyer. The lawyer's face didn't change, but his pen ticked to life. As you wish. Wentworth sputtered. This is unnecessary. It's overdue, Marcus said. He turned his head slightly. Mary, the young assistant from the hallway, peered in. She'd been hovering, unsure if she belonged anywhere near history. Marcus beckoned her with 2 fingers. She stepped inside. You'll witness the minutes, he said. Stand by the legal counsel. A tremor of humiliation rippled through the board. It wasn't just a recorder. It was the presence of someone who had watched the locked door. Caldwell cleared his throat. Mr. Ellison, we've misstepped. The words were sanded of pride. But the company needs this merger. We ask that you sign so we can address internal matters afterward. Marcus studied him. Then let his gaze drift along the row of faces. Pearl necklace gone still against a rigid throat. The CFO folding and refolding a linen napkin. Wentworth trying to glare the recorder into silence. Internal matters, Marcus repeated, almost gently. Let's call them by their names so the minutes don't get confused. He glanced at Mary. Note, prior to the session, several directors characterized Ellison Dynamics as a sideshow and its CEO as a seat warmer in a suit. Color bled out of the pearl necklace executive's face. Those were... Minutes only reflect what happened, Marcus said. We'll let them do their job. He turned the contract around and slid it closer, not to sign, but to rest an open palm on the page. You call my approval formality. Unfortunately for the narrative, though not for the law, my signature is something else. Wentworth leaned forward, forcing a smile that showed his teeth. Marcus, we're all on the same team. We are not on the same team, Marcus said, still calm. We are not even playing the same sport. Stillness again, a heat that rose without touching the thermostat. Caldwell exhaled slowly. What do you want? Marcus picked up his pen, not to sign, but to draw a small square on a blank sheet. I want a culture that doesn't treat results as costume jewelry to hang on its own vanity. But that takes longer than I'm going to stand here. So let's talk about the next 30 minutes. He set the pen down. Ellison Dynamics controls 62% of the patents that make this merger compelling. Our master service agreements with 6 of Titan's top 10 enterprise clients include change of control consent. He tapped the contract. That clause was not a flourish. It was a seatbelt. A murmur. The CFO straightened. That can't apply to... It does, Marcus said, eyes never leaving him. Section 11C. Consent not to be unreasonably withheld, unless the change demonstrably harms product integrity or customer trust. You have ensured both. The lawyer's pen paused. He flipped a tab page, read, then looked up with a clinical bleakness. He's correct. Wentworth's chair scraped. This is brinkmanship. No, Marcus said. This is a smoke alarm you learn to sleep through. He reached back into his portfolio and pulled out a crisp, 2-page document stamped with a Navy crest. He laid it on the table and slid it toward Caldwell. This is a letter of intent from Northbridge Capital. The room inhaled in one ragged sound. Before the jokes about my little innovation wing finished curdling, Marcus continued, You should know the terms. Northbridge will capitalize Ellison Dynamics as a standalone company, take a minority stake, and back a roll-up of our suppliers. We retain operational control. They provide global distribution. The LOI is contingent on a single condition, that I decline to co-sign your merger. Caldwell didn't touch the paper. He looked at it as if it had been set aflame. You negotiated behind the board's back. I negotiated in front of your behavior, Marcus said. Northbridge didn't lock any doors. They asked what it would take to build a future that wasn't ashamed of itself. The Pearl Necklace director found her voice. You'd fracture Titan to, what, teaches a lesson? Marcus turned to her. I keep faith with the engineers who slept on lab floors to ship releases you took credit for. I protect customers who entrusted their data to a leadership that laughs before it listens. If that fractures Titan, Titan did the cracking. Wentworth slapped his palm on the table. Crystal chimed. You're holding this company hostage with your ego. Marcus's answer was so quiet the chandelier seemed to dim to hear it. I sat outside a locked door and said nothing for 43 minutes. If I had an ego like yours, there would be broken glass. No one spoke. He looked to Mary. How are the minutes? She swallowed. Accurate, sir. Good. Marcus clasped his hands behind his back. There's a path where I sign, he said, and the board visibly leaned forward like a single organism learning to hope. But it is narrow and it is expensive, and it starts with truth. He lifted a finger. First, a public statement, not the gelatinous we fell short language, naming what happened, that a black executive was excluded from a decision he was legally required to authorize, that derision replaced diligence, and that leadership, not policy, failed. A second finger. Second, immediate resignation of Charles Wentworth from the board his role as senior vice chair. He turned finally and met Wentworth's stare. Not negotiated. Not deferred. Today. Wentworth's mouth opened, then closed without sound. A third finger. Third, an independent culture audit led by a firm I select with unfettered access from the board down. Findings published, not summarized, in full. He raised a fourth. Fourth, 2 new board seats added. One reserved for an operator who has shipped real product at scale. One for a leader nominated by our employee resource groups. Not tokens. Votes. He held the silence, then let his hand fall. And fifth, A binding commitment to invest a fixed percentage of this year's merger proceeds bonus pool into scholarships and founder grants for underrepresented engineers and entrepreneurs, administered by a third-party foundation with no Titan control. His eyes found Caldwell's. Call it restitution if the word philanthropy makes you itch. Caldwell's jaw moved, ground down, released. You put a gun to our head on signing day. Marcus nodded. No, I'm offering you a map out of a fire you built. The CFO leaned in, desperate. We can phase some of this, structure a timeline. Every delay, Marcus said, reads like a survival strategy, not a sincerity strategy. Your stock algorithm knows the difference, even if you don't. Wentworth surged half out of his chair. You don't have the votes to force my resignation. You don't have the votes to stop the tape, Marcus replied, eyes flicking to the recorder. And you don't have the customers to survive the story this room already wrote. Caldwell finally touched the LOI. His fingers grazed the edge like he was testing cold water. How far along are you in Northbridge? Diligence is complete. Supplier protections drafted. 3 anchor customers have signed letters indicating consent will not be granted if Titan closes under current leadership. Marcus let that land. They prefer stability that doesn't hate them in private. The corporate lawyer, to his credit, did his job. If Mr. Ellison executes this LOI and declines to sign, the merger collapses. Titan's leverage with Centronix disappears. We will be sued. We will settle. Share price will suffer materially. Unless, Marcus said, you decide you prefer the cost of integrity to the cost of denial. Caldwell stared at the paper, then at Marcus, then at the faces around the table. Calculating, aging, seeing perhaps for the first time the narrowness of the power they curated. The chandelier's light trembled in his glass. What happens, he said softly, if we agree? Marcus blinked once. If you accept all 5 conditions in writing today and execute the resignations in this room today, he tapped the contract. I sign. We walk into the press conference as a leadership team that admits mistakes and names remedies. Not heroes, simply adults. And if we refuse? Marcus turned the recorder off. The sudden quiet had a weight of its own. Then I thank you for your time, he said, gathering his portfolio, and I keep my promise to the people who work for me. We'll build what you thought you were buying. He slid the LOI back toward himself, then reconsidered and left it where it lay, like a mirror the room could not avoid. At the doorway he paused, not theatrically, just long enough to be remembered. Doors are tests, he said without turning. You locked yours. I opened mine. He stepped out. Behind him, the boardroom erupted, not into shouting, but into the frantic shuffling of men who had discovered the ground beneath their shoes was a trapdoor. The news broke before the boardroom's coffee cooled. By dawn the next morning, every financial outlet carried some version of the same headline. Titan global merger in jeopardy amid governance crisis. Anonymous insider reveals racial bias at Titan board. CEO Marcus Ellison holds veto power over billion-dollar deal. The story spread like fire through dry grass. Social media exploded with outrage, dissecting leaked details, debating boardroom arrogance. Hashtags trended by noon. Analysts debated the legality of Marcus's veto. Civil rights commentators weighed in on the optics of locking a black CEO outside a door his signature legally opened. Titan Global's stock chart looked like a cliff. Inside Titan's glass tower, chaos ruled. Caldwell's office, once a sanctuary of power with its skyline view and quiet confidence, buzzed like a panicked hive. Assistants rushed in and out, phones glued to ears, paper spilling from their hands. Television screens mounted on the walls displayed split-screen panels. Anchors debating. Tickers bleeding red numbers. A live shot of Northbridge's headquarters where reporters camped outside. Wentworth stormed in, face crimson, voice booming. This is a witch hunt. We give that man an inch. He takes the entire company hostage. No, Charles, Caldwell said, his voice drained of authority. He looked older than he had yesterday. We gave him the entire company when we decided to treat him like a pawn. Wentworth slammed his fist on the desk. He's bluffing. He won't tank his own division. The corporate lawyer stepped forward, voice even. The Northbridge LOI is real, their counsel confirmed. And 3 of our enterprise customers have already sent notice of consent withdrawal. If Mr. Ellison does not sign, the merger dies. There is no bluff. Wentworth froze, fury curdling into something like fear. Caldwell closed his eyes. You've just destroyed yourself, Charles. While Titan scrambled, Marcus moved quietly. At Ellison Dynamics headquarters, a converted warehouse thrumming with energy, the atmosphere was electric. Engineers huddled around glowing screens. Project leads fielded calls from clients suddenly eager to reaffirm loyalty, and the hum of servers in the data center was underscored by something new: pride. Marcus walked the floor, suit jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up. He shook hands, paused to listen, offered short words of encouragement. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him with something beyond respect. Vindication. They had all seen the headlines. They knew their leader had stood against arrogance not with anger, but with precision. A junior engineer, barely out of college, stopped him by the espresso machine. Mr. Ellison, thank you for not letting them treat you like that. His voice wavered with emotion. Marcus laid a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't just about me. It's about every one of you who's ever been underestimated. What we build here will prove them wrong more loudly than any speech could. The young man nodded fiercely, eyes bright. By midweek, Titan's collapse was undeniable. The press conference they had planned to announce the merger became a public reckoning. Instead of triumph, cameras captured resignation. Wentworth, face ashen, read a brief statement acknowledging his departure from the board. His voice quivered despite the practice script. The pearl necklace executive followed, offering her own resignation letter. Analysts on live feeds called it a symbolic purge, but the symbolism was costly. Each public exit sent Titan's market value tumbling further. Then Caldwell himself appeared, once the embodiment of unshakable leadership. He looked like a relic, his voice somber. "We failed," he said into the microphones. "We failed to uphold the principles of fairness, respect, and integrity that should define corporate governance. For that, we take responsibility. Mr. Ellison was right to hold us accountable." He paused, the weight of humiliation heavy. "Effective immediately, I will step down as chairman of Titan Global." The room gasped. Cameras clicked in rapid-fire bursts. Reporters shouted questions. But Caldwell simply lowered his head and walked off stage. The story had flipped entirely. Where once Marcus had been dismissed as a formality, now he was painted as a man who would save his employees from becoming collateral in a rigged game. Editorials praised his refusal to be silent. Think tanks cited his conditions as a blueprint for corporate accountability. Students at business schools quoted his line about doors being tests. And investors, they flocked to Ellison Dynamics. With Northbridge's capital injection confirmed, the company's valuation soared. Suppliers signed long-term agreements. Clients extended contracts. The very innovation Titan had mocked as a sideshow now became the center of gravity in the industry. Marcus had not just vetoed a merger. He had rewritten the narrative of who held power. A week later, in a private room at a New York hotel, Marcus sat across from Northbridge's partners. The deal papers lay on the table, ready to sign. One of the partners, a tall Swiss financier with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "Mr. Ellison, you must understand, you've done more than shift one deal. You've changed the weather. Companies will be thinking twice before dismissing the voices they once ignored." Marcus smiled faintly, pen in hand. "Let's just say they mistook silence for absence. They won't again." He signed. Flashbulbs exploded. The partnership was official. That night, Marcus stood alone by the window of his penthouse apartment. The city pulsed below, headlights streaking like arteries of light. In the glass, his reflection stared back at him. Calm, steady, changed. He thought of the hallway outside the boardroom, of the laughter muffled through wood, of the humiliation of being told he was irrelevant. He thought of his parents, who had taught him resilience, of the young assistant, whose wide eyes had seen both the insult and the reversal, of the engineers at Ellison Dynamics, whose trust he carried. And he thought of Titan, crumbling under the weight of its own arrogance. Power wasn't loud, he realized. It wasn't the laugh echoing inside a locked room. It wasn't the swagger of men convinced they were untouchable. Power was patience. Power was silence sharpened into timing. Power was sitting outside a door until the people inside realized the hinges belonged to you. Marcus raised his glass, not to revenge, not to victory, but to responsibility. The skyline answered with 1,000 lights. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.